Ladies and gentlemen, I never thought I would be standing here in Fiona in my collective Third World's Grand Final, again from opening government. But this time, I am genuinely proud to support the proposal that we bring before the House. Robert Mugabe has systematically oppressed the people of Zimbabwe for nigh on a decade. Right now, 5 million people, and increasing every day, are living behind the poverty line. Not because Zimbabwe is too poor to do anything about it, but because Robert Mugabe's policies have actively destroyed the country. The cholera epidemic that we thought was being fixed is again resurgent and spreading within Zimbabwe, and that there is clear and active lack of respect for the will of the people within Zimbabwe. Attacks on the MDC and Morgan Tsvangirai have resumed, to the point where the leader of the opposition movement for democratic change, Morgan Tsvangirai, has himself called for the African Union and the South African development community to send in armed peacekeepers to restore democratic rule in Zimbabwe. We think this is a brilliant idea. The aim of the government bench is to remove Robert Mugabe from power and restore Zimbabwean democracy. We believe the international, and in particular the African community, has sat on the sidelines for too long. We believe this policy will bring about positive change, both for the people in Zimbabwe and for African democracy across the continent. Our model is clear. We think in much the same way that ECOWAS has just issued a threat to Côte d'Ivoire that is backed up with threat of military intervention in a very short period of time, we believe that the South African development community and the African Union should issue Robert Mugabe an ultimatum. You have 1 month to a similarly appropriate time to accept an amnesty in South Africa, beyond which time the SADC and the AU will send in ground and air forces supported by the technology of the West in the form of the United Nations to bring about an end to his dictatorial rule. We will go in and destroy systematically the hardened military targets with airstrikes, and the thousands of troops in Zimbabwe will stand no mechanism and no real opposition to the combined forces of the SADC, the AU, and the United Nations. We believe this should be followed up with a massive international aid package and the presence of peacekeepers in the nation until free and fair elections can be held and a transition to a stable society can be guaranteed. And we expect this will be long-term. We expect peacekeepers will be there for 5 to 10 years, in much the same way as ECOWAS did in Liberia and Sierra Leone successfully. Why do we think it's necessary to act? Because we think that sovereignty is not an absolute, and the government of Robert Mugabe has given up any claim that it had to being the sovereign leader of its nation. We think that sovereignty is a historical artifact that is just there to help governments work in an international arena, and more importantly, to help governments recognise the will of the people. Well, we think Robert Mugabe has broken the criterion that are necessary for us to respect sovereignty. The first of these is that there is a humanitarian crisis in Zimbabwe that is unresponded to or actively furthered by the government of that nation. And in just the same way as we accept that there is a principle to act in the case of genocide, we think likewise that allowing poverty, famine and disease to spread and actively putting policies in place to encourage that should be considered just as much a crime against the people of that country. The second reason is that sovereignty should only be recognised by the international community when a government has a claim to represent the will of the people. We don't think this actually means perfect democracy. We're more than happy to say that in many cases governments like China do a very good job of representing the will for economic development of the vast majority of their people. But in Zimbabwe, this is clearly not the case. In the most recent poll that was conducted, only 18% said they would support Robert Mugabe, 32% said Tsvangirai, and 40% were so terrorised by Robert Mugabe's forces that they didn't comment, because that is the degree of fear that is held. More than this, power sharing has been an absolute unadmissible failure in Zimbabwe. The solution that the international community tried was to get MDC and Morgan Tsvangirai to share power in a peaceful, happy nirvana with Robert Mugabe. The result has been that Mugabe has kept power, has kept control of every major ministry, including Defence, Home Affairs, Interior Ministry and Finance, in such a way as to strangle the control of every other. We think the government is not acting in a crisis and doesn't respect the will of the people. The third reason why sovereignty can be cut out is because all other methods have been tried and failed. We've tried everything. that South Africa sent Thabo Mbeki to negotiate with Robert Mugabe in an attempt to get him to step down. It didn't work. We've put sanctions as a broad sense on Zimbabwe. It didn't work. And we don't think that it should be the case of sanctions used, because they hurt the people on the ground in Zimbabwe most of all. We think that targeted sanctions on senior Zimbabwean ministers have again been tried and failed. So why is our solution the one that will work to restore power in Zimbabwe? The main reason is we believe, firstly, that amnesty backed up with a credible threat is incredibly likely to succeed. The reason that Robert Mugabe didn't accept the amnesty in 2000 that Kofi Annan offered him was because there was no reason to think that he would be thrust out by force. We changed that. But secondly, this invasion would work. Before I talk about it, sir.
If you basically oppose sanctions because they cause loss damage to innocent poor people, how is launching a land invasion in many ways as well?
It's a very good question. We have answers for it. The answer is that the combined forces of South Africa and the United Nations are vastly technologically superior to the underfed and under-equipped forces of Zimbabwe. This will be a quick and clean military action. This is classic army versus army warfare, which the West and its allies in South Africa is very strong in this regard, know how to do well. The problem you might be thinking out is protracted insurgency post the initial thing, like we got in Iraq. The initial conflict there was clean, not many civilians died. We got stuck in an insurgency afterwards. Well, the difference here is that the hearts and minds of the Zimbabwean people are on the side of the liberators who will liberate them from Robert Mugabe, led them with promises of liberation into greater oppression than ever before. And those poll statistics I gave you before are indicative. The other reason why we think we won't get the same drawn-out conflict is because we think our post-conflict handling will be much better than Afghanistan or Iraq, for a couple of reasons. The first of these is that we'll hold elections quickly and there is a credible opposition ready to take power. And the few times Chamberai did have some influence, he brought about an end to inflation and restored the economy before Mugabe rolled those back and took control again. Secondly, this will bring about a total lift of sanctions and, as our policy said, massive economic engagement. The problem is donors don't want to donate to Robert Mugabe in Zimbabwe right now, and this will open the floodgates for America and EU to rapidly develop the country and fix it. Ladies and gentlemen, this is a solution that can work, because the armed conflict will be over quickly and they will have clear, credible opposition that post-development will happen in an effective way. But more than that, it's something we have to do for the people of Zimbabwe and for the people of Africa. Thank you.